November 15th, 1983, Atlantic City International Airport. A woman in an expensive coat approaches the passport control desk. In her purse, a one-way ticket to Geneva. In Swiss bank accounts, millions of dollars that officially don't exist. In her address book, phone numbers of people whose mere mention made FBI agents pale. The customs officer stares at her passport too long. Far too long. "Ma'am, please come with me," he says quietly. This woman is Roslyn Ashford, the only woman in the history of American organized crime who was unofficially recognized as equal among the mafia bosses, the one they called the Godmother of the East Coast Underworld. The woman who, over 20 years, built a shadow empire worth tens of millions of dollars. And now, on this cold November day, her empire is crumbling. But to understand how she ended up here, we need to go back 38 years, to Miami, to the day when the entire country was celebrating victory. May 8th, 1945, Jewish quarter of Miami Beach. While fireworks burst over the ocean and people embrace in happiness, a girl is born in a small apartment on the 3rd floor. Her father, Milton Ashford, a petroleum engineer, has just returned from the war without his left arm. Her mother, Rachel Goldman, a pediatrician, is delivering her neighbor's baby because all the hospitals are overcrowded. They named the girl Roslyn, after the rose, a symbol of both beauty and thorns. Contemporaries remembered that the Ashford family stood out even among Miami's Jewish intelligentsia. Music always filled the house. The father, despite his lost arm, played piano virtuously. The mother knew 5 languages and translated medical articles from foreign journals. Little Roslyn grew up in an atmosphere where knowledge, culture, and thinking were valued above all. She was an unusual child, recalled her schoolteacher, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, who was over 80 by 1990. While other children played hopscotch, Roslyn organized entire theatrical productions, assigned roles, created costumes from nothing, negotiated with teachers for rehearsal space. At 10 years old, she already understood how to manage people. But there was one dark stroke in this perfect picture. Roslyn's father suffered from phantom pains. His non-existent left arm hurt so badly that he screamed at night. Morphine, which he started taking in the hospital, gradually became his only salvation. By 1955, Milton Ashford was a full-blown morphine addict. Roslyn was 10 when she first saw her father in a state of narcotic madness. He didn't recognize her, called her by a stranger's name, tried to strike her. Her mother pretended nothing was happening. This was Roslyn's first lesson in the art of living a double life. By day, an exemplary American family. By night, a hell that no one could talk about. At 15, first love entered Roslyn's life. His name was Rafael Torres. He was 3 years older, the son of a famous Miami tailor, a handsome Cuban boy with black eyes and a voice like Frank Sinatra. They met secretly. Roslyn's parents were against it. They planned to run away to New York after high school to study theater. April 12th, 1961, the day Yuri Gagarin flew into space, Rafael got into a fight defending Roslyn's honor from a drunk who made a crude joke. The knife strike went straight to his heart. Rafael died in Roslyn's arms within 3 minutes. His last words were, "Don't cry, my sunshine." After Rafael's funeral, Roslyn's father made a decision. His daughter needed to be married off immediately, away from sin, away from shame. And then appeared Samuel Goldman, a 62-year-old jeweler, family friend who had long been hopelessly in love with Rachel, Roslyn's mother. "I'll give the girl everything," he told her parents. "An apartment in Manhattan, money, jewelry. She'll live like a princess." Roslyn wasn't given a choice. In July 1962, 3 months after Rafael's death, the 17-year-old girl became the wife of a man old enough to be her grandfather. But here's what's interesting. Even then, Sitting at City Hall in a white dress next to a groom who smelled of naphthalene and expensive tobacco, Roslyn didn't cry. Witnesses remembered her strange smile, not happy, not sad, just knowing, as if she could already see 10 moves ahead. Wedding night. The Plaza Hotel, luxury suite. Samuel Goldman, having drunk cognac for courage, tries to kiss his young wife. Roslyn pulls away. "Mr. Goldman," she says calmly, looking him straight in the eye, "let's make an agreement. I'll be your wife in public, the perfect wife. But in the bedroom, let's skip that part. You're a smart man. You understand I can't do this." Goldman, to his credit, understood. Moreover, he truly came to love this strange girl with a protective, paternal kind of love. For the next 2 years, they lived like father and daughter playing spouses for the outside world. New York greeted Roslyn with a cold October in 1962. A 3-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, view of Central Park. Hardwood floors installed before the Depression. Goldman introduced his wife to his circle. Jewelers, antique dealers, art restorers, people who lived on the boundary between legal and illegal, between old money and new money, between what's permitted and what's necessary. Roslyn learned. She absorbed knowledge like a sponge about stones, metals, jewelry history. Goldman, happy to be useful, spent hours telling her about the intricacies of diamond grading, how to distinguish a fake Fabergé from an original, how to determine a stone's age by its cut. "See this emerald?" he'd say, showing her a ring from his personal collection. "Colombian, mined in Muzo. But that's not its value. It belonged to a Vanderbilt." After the stock market crash, the ring passed through the hands of bootleggers, then to a political boss who gave it to his mistress. She sold it out of necessity. Every stone is a story, and whoever knows these stories controls the world. March 8, 1964. Samuel Goldman woke with chest pain. "Roslyn, darling," he whispered, "everything in the safe is yours. The combination is our wedding date." An hour later, he was dead. Heart attack. Neighbors later said Roslyn didn't even scream, just sat next to the body and held his hand until the ambulance arrived. At the funeral, the entire New York jewelry underground gathered. Roslyn, in a black dress, looked like an Italian film heroine, beautiful, untouchable, dangerous. After the cemetery, many came to the apartment for the wake, and then something happened that changed everything. A certain Bernard Shapiro, a fat jeweler with sweaty hands, pulled Roslyn aside. "Sweetheart," he said, "Sam owed me a large sum, 20,000. With interest, it's 30. I understand, grief and all, but business is business." Roslyn looked at him with a long gaze, then smiled. "Mr. Shapiro," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Sam told me about that emerald set you sold to the Deputy Attorney General's wife. I wonder if she knows the stones are synthetic." Silence fell. Shapiro went pale. Selling synthetic stones as natural to the political elite wasn't just fraud. It was career suicide. I was joking about the debt," Shapiro mumbled. "And I was joking about the set. We're all friends here, right?" This was the moment when the 19-year-old widow showed her teeth and the New York criminal world noticed. Over the next 6 months, Roslyn methodically sold her husband's estate, but not randomly. She studied each buyer, remembered their weaknesses, their connections, their secrets. Gradually, she understood. In this world, information is worth more than diamonds. And then she was noticed by a man who would change her life forever. Arnold Castellano, nicknamed the Professor, not to be confused with Vincent Corelli, who would appear later. Castellano ran the foreign currency section at a luxury import store on Fifth Avenue. Officially, an honest American businessman. Unofficially, one of New York's largest money launderers. "Girl," he told Roslyn at their first meeting, You're too smart to just sell your dead husband's trinkets. Want real money? Roslyn wanted it. But more than money, she wanted the power she'd seen in the eyes of people who feared her exposure. And Castellano's operation was the perfect place for that. But that's the beginning of an entirely different story. The Emerald Club, 5th Avenue, December 1965. Behind the counter, 20-year-old Roslyn in a form-fitting cocktail dress. Before her, a diplomat's wife from West Germany selecting perfume. Roslyn smiles, advises, and in her head she's already running the calculation. Mrs. Steiner has a lover, an army colonel from the Pentagon. They meet Thursdays at an apartment in Georgetown. The colonel let slip information about new missile deployments in West Germany. This information, Roslyn will sell within a week for $5,000. Not to the FBI, they pay pennies, but to the colonel's competitors in the service who desperately need to undermine him. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go in order. At the Emerald Club, Roslyn worked for exactly 1 year and 3 months. During that time, hundreds of foreigners and American citizens with foreign currency privileges passed through her hands. She remembered everything. Who came with whom, who bought what, who got nervous at the sight of police. By spring 1966, she had files on half of New York's elite. And then came Diane. Diane Marino, daughter of the deputy chief of the New York Commerce Department. Beautiful, with the mannerisms of a Hollywood starlet. They became friends, as much as two predators can be friends. Diane took Roslyn to exclusive parties. Roslyn helped Diane obtain luxury goods through the back door. May 15th, 1966. Diane came to Roslyn's apartment. They drank Armenian cognac. Diane opened up. You know, girlfriend, I have a scheme. We buy duty-free receipts from sailors at half price. Through my dad, I process them as legitimate. We split the profit 50-50. Roslyn agreed. It was a trap. 2 weeks later, June 1st, 1966, ironically International Children's Day, FBI agents burst into Roslyn's apartment. The search lasted 8 hours. They found everything. Fake receipts, foreign currency, gold. Diane had given her up completely. Every operation, every meeting, every bill. During interrogation, Special Agent Thomas Kurowski chain-smoked cigarettes. Ms. Ashford, you understand you're looking at 8 years. Currency fraud is no joke. But we can make a deal. Tell us about everyone, about Castellano, his people, the schemes. Become a witness, get probation. Roslyn was silent for 3 days. On the 4th, she said only, I want a lawyer. The trial was a show. The prosecutor demanded 10 years. The lawyer, hired by anonymous benefactors, Roslyn never learned who, managed to knock it down to 3. Young, inexperienced, fell under the influence of criminal elements. Metropolitan Correctional Center, New York, Women's Wing, Cell 47. 18 women in a space designed for 8. Thieves, fraudsters, murderers, and a 21-year-old Jewish girl with a college education. The first night, Roslyn didn't sleep. She pressed her back against the cold wall and listened to a woman on the neighboring bunk snore. Big Martha, convicted for stabbing her husband and his mistress. On the second day, Matilda, the unofficial cell boss serving her 3rd sentence for armed robbery, approached Roslyn. Listen, princess, she said, we got rules here. Newbies do laundry, cleaning, give up their food. Got it? Roslyn looked her in the eye, then pulled out a comb, the only personal item she'd been allowed to keep. You know what I noticed? She said calmly. You're on your 3rd sentence, and you've never had a decent lawyer. Know why? Because you don't know Article 58 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. But I do, and I can teach you. Or I can choose not to. Your call. By the end of the week, Roslyn was giving lectures on criminal law to the entire cell. Women, many of whom were illiterate, listened to her as if hypnotized. She explained how to write proper appeals, which statutes could be used to reduce sentences, how to behave during interrogations. But she earned real authority through a different story. They brought a new girl into the cell, Lucy, about 17, convicted for stealing food from the restaurant where she worked. First offense. Scared, thin as a rail. That night, 3 women decided to assault her. In women's prisons, this meant rape with improvised objects, after which the victim became an outcast forever. Roslyn woke to crying. She saw Matilda and her friends dragging the girl to the corner. She stood up, walked over. "Let her go," she said quietly. "Or what?" Matilda laughed. "You gonna lawyer us to death?" "No," Roslyn answered, and drove a sharpened comb into Matilda's thigh. Not deep, about an inch, but enough to draw blood. Here you need to understand prison laws. Roslyn could have struck deeper, killed, but she struck precisely to show, I can kill, but I'm giving you a chance. It was a sign of strength and simultaneously an offer of peace. Matilda, clutching her leg, looked at Roslyn with new respect. "All right," she said. "The girl's under your protection, but you're responsible for her now." From that moment, Roslyn became the mediator, the one who resolved disputes in the cell. People came to her not just for legal advice. She arbitrated conflicts, divided packages, protected the weak. And here's what's important. She began corresponding with the men's prison. Through female inmates who worked in the infirmary, notes were passed. The mob bosses sitting in the MCC were intrigued. Who was this woman who knew the law better than prison lawyers? One of them, Vincent Diamond Vinnie Corelli, who would die in a prison fight in '78, sent her a gift, an aluminum ring made from a spoon. In the criminal world, this was a sign of the highest respect, practically a proposal to become a mob wife. Roslyn accepted the ring but replied with a note. "Thank you for the honor, but I only marry freedom." March 1969. Roslyn walks out the gates of the Metropolitan Correctional Center. She's wearing the same dress she was arrested in 3 years ago, only now it hangs like a sack. She's lost 30 pounds in 3 years. In her hands, a cardboard suitcase with her belongings. No one came to meet her. The apartment on the Upper West Side had been seized during her absence for illegal enrichment. No money. Her parents in Miami had disowned her, a disgrace to a respectable family. Roslyn walks on foot across Manhattan to the only person who might help. Vincent "Spike" Malone. Spike was a separate story. Officially the manager of Murphy's Pub in Hell's Kitchen. Unofficially the mob's overseer for all of Midtown Manhattan. At 45 he looked 60, gray, hunched, with shaking hands, the result of 7 years in solitary at Attica. Roslyn had gotten to know him through prison correspondence. Spike had been impressed by her legal knowledge and promised to help after her release. "So the lawyer came through," Spike smirked, seeing her in the pub doorway. "Skinny thing. Don't worry, you'll fatten up on beer and pretzels. Simple job. Pour drinks, smile, listen. Especially listen. You'll live upstairs. $80 a week. Questions?" No questions. Roslyn understood. This was her chance. Murphy's Pub in Hell's Kitchen wasn't just a drinking spot. It was where deals were made, information exchanged, agreements sealed. The first month was hell. Getting up at 5 a.m., hauling cases of bottles, mopping floors, cleaning up after drunks. Her hands blistered, her back ached, her feet throbbed. But Roslyn endured and listened. By May, she knew everything. Which local cops took bribes and how much, which mobsters were running which operations, which legitimate businessmen were fencing stolen goods. She kept a notebook, wrote in small handwriting, coded names. Spike noticed. "You're smart," he said one day. "Too smart for a bartender. Want more?" He proposed a scheme. Set up a card game in the pub's basement, unofficial, for insiders only. Roslyn would manage it. Spike would provide protection. Profits split 50-50. But Roslyn proposed something different. Let's make it more than a card game. Let's make it a real casino. Roulette, blackjack, showgirls, like Vegas. Spike laughed. Girl, you think you're in Monte Carlo? They'll shut us down in a week. They'll shut down a card game too, Roslyn replied. But if we do it right, if we bring in the right people, if we share appropriately. And she laid out the scheme. A casino for the elite, exclusive club, entry by recommendation only. Clients, politicians, union bosses, diplomats, security provided by the mob, police protection for a percentage. FBI turns a blind eye in exchange for information about clients. How do you know the FBI will go for it? Spike asked. Roslyn smiled. Because I've already arranged it. This was a lie. But Spike believed her. And when, a week later, a man in a gray suit actually approached Roslyn and introduced himself as a bureau liaison, Spike decided this woman was a genius. In reality, it was simpler. Roslyn, through her prison connections, had reached out to an FBI agent's wife who had problems. Her husband was cheating with his secretary. Roslyn helped gather evidence. In gratitude, the wife put in a word with her husband about a useful informant. By August 1969, games were in full swing in Murphy's basement. Simple at first, poker, blackjack, 21. But Roslyn was preparing the main strike. Through Spike, she connected with Arthur Benedetti, head of the Benedetti crime family, controlling half of New York's underground economy. Benedetti was impressed by the young woman who talked about business like a seasoned economist. Girl, he said at their first meeting at Rayo's restaurant, you understand what you're getting into. This isn't playing dress-up. Mr. Benedetti, I did 3 years. I saw women raped with mop handles. I saw a mother strangle her own baby. You think anything scares me after that? Benedetti assessed her and made an offer. 3 casinos under joint management. He provides startup capital and protection. Roslyn provides brains and management. 70-30 in his favor. 50-50, Roslyn said. Are you out of your mind? Benedetti asked. No, I just know my worth. Without me, you'll have 3 dives where degenerates play for pennies. With me, you'll have elite establishments where ministers come to play. They agreed on 60-40. And this was the beginning of Roslyn Ashford's empire. October 1969, Penn Station. A man in a diplomatic suit exits a first-class car. In his suitcase, with a false bottom, a roulette wheel disassembled into parts. A real one, from a Las Vegas casino being renovated. Cost, $15,000. Buyer, Roslyn Ashford. You ask, where did a former convict get such money? The story, told for years in criminal circles, sounds like a movie script. A month earlier, a man came to Roslyn. His name was Simon Goldberg. According to documents, a textile equipment technician. In reality, one of the largest underground jewelers in the Northeast. He had a problem. His wife found out about his mistress and threatened to go to the police, tell them about his illegal income. They told me you solve difficult problems, he said to Roslyn. Depends on the problem, she replied. I need my wife to change her mind about going to the police. Another person would have refused or suggested a criminal solution. Roslyn did differently. She met with Goldberg's wife, Mrs. Rachel Goldberg, a math teacher at a prestigious private school. They talked for 4 hours. What about? Contemporaries remember only the finale. Mrs. Goldberg not only didn't go to the police but helped her husband legitimize part of his capital through shell companies, and Goldberg's mistress suddenly decided to move to California. In gratitude, Goldberg not only provided money for the roulette wheel but also connected Roslyn with the right people in diplomatic circles. They assembled the roulette wheel over 3 days in an apartment in Chelsea. The apartment had been specially bought and renovated. They knocked down walls between 3 units, creating a huge hall. The parquet was covered with red carpet from the Waldorf Astoria, written off as damaged and sold for a bottle of whiskey to the janitor. The first game took place on November 7th, 1969, anniversary of the Russian Revolution, when all the police were at parades and guarding events. The first client was the assistant manager of Delmonico's. He lost $3,000 in one night, but returned a week later and brought friends. By December, Roslyn's casino was hosting store managers, union bosses, Broadway actors. Minimum bet, $100, when the average weekly wage was $120. But people played, lost monthly and yearly salaries. Here's a story told by a former NYPD detective who worked those years. We had this case. A furniture factory manager, Victor something, lost 80 grand in one night. It wasn't his money. Factory funds meant for lumber purchases. Morning comes. He realizes he's got an audit in 2 days. He comes to Roslyn, falls on his knees. Save me. I'll kill myself. She looked at him like a child, poured him cognac. Drink, she says, and listen carefully. And she laid out a scheme. He files false documents about a warehouse theft. She gives him 30 grand to bribe the investigator. The remaining 50 he pays back at $3,000 a month with interest. But here's the thing. She didn't just save him. She made him her eternal debtor. Through him, she later ran schemes with furniture for her new casinos. He worked for her until his death. And you know what? He worshipped her, called her his savior. By spring 1970, Roslyn was running 3 casinos. One in the Chelsea apartment with that roulette wheel, the second in a mansion in Brooklyn Heights disguised as a private social club. The third, the most elite, in the basement of a restaurant in Little Italy. At the Little Italy location, they only admitted people by recommendation. The stakes were serious, up to $10,000 a hand. People came whose names couldn't be spoken aloud. Children of senators, wives of federal judges, mob bosses in civilian clothes. And here's where it gets really interesting. Roslyn didn't just organize the games. She gathered information. She had an entire system. Dealers remembered conversations, waitresses eavesdropped, security noted who came with whom. You can't imagine what secrets people spill during a game, recalled one of the dealers who worked for Roslyn. Someone brags about connections, someone complains about their boss, someone drunkenly tells about schemes at work. And Roslyn wrote it all down in her little notebooks. She had an entire archive of compromising material. But Roslyn understood. Sooner or later, they'd come for the casinos. She needed serious protection. January 1972, 20 degrees below zero. Unusual excitement at the Chelsea casino. An important guest is expected. Security doubled. Dealers in their best suits. Even the cognac isn't American. It's French Hennessy, obtained through diplomats. Midnight. The door opens. A short man with Eastern European features enters. Eyes like a wolf's, smile like a kid's. This is Slava the Russian Ivanov. Yes, that Russian. He's 32, but already has 2 prison stints behind him and a reputation as one of the most dangerous mob enforcers in New York. So you're the famous Roslyn, he says, giving her an appraising look. Tiny thing, but I hear you make big noise all over the city. Small dogs bark louder, Roslyn replies, and bite harder, the Russian adds, laughing. They talked until morning. Didn't gamble, just sat in a private room, drank tea, and talked. What can a Russian mob enforcer and a woman who built an underground casino empire talk about? Contemporaries remember only fragments of that conversation. The Russian talked about mob codes, about how the criminal hierarchy works. Roslyn about the psychology of gamblers, about how to make a person lose everything and still be grateful. You know what your problem is? The Russian said toward morning. You're too smart. Smart people don't live long in our world. What about stupid people? Roslyn asked. Stupid people live even less. The cunning survive. Then I'll be cunning. They became lovers within a week. This was a violation of all the rules. A made man wasn't supposed to have a family, but the Russian didn't care about rules when it came to Roslyn. Here's what Victor Vic the Ice Severino, a mob captain and friend of the Russian, said about their relationship. I saw the Russian with different women, beautiful, dumb, dangerous. But with Roslyn, he was different. She could tell him, Slava, that's stupid, and he'd listen. The Russian listened to a woman. You understand what that means in our world? Once there was a situation. The Russian wanted to teach some dealer a lesson for shorting one of our guys. He was ready to go with the boys to settle it. Roslyn says, wait. Picks up the phone, makes a call. An hour later, the dealer shows up himself, falls on his knees, returns the money in triple. Turns out Roslyn knew the dealer's daughter was applying to medical school and hinted there might be problems with admission. No violence, pure psychology. In March 1973, Roslyn got pregnant. This should have been the end of their relationship. A pregnant mistress for a made man was a disgrace. But the Russian did something incredible. He publicly declared the child wasn't his, that he was just helping a woman in trouble. Everyone understood, but formally, the Russian hadn't broken mob rules. December 26, 1973. Victor was born. In the prison hospital, Roslyn had been arrested 2 weeks before delivery on false charges, so the Russian couldn't be present at the birth. This was a move by competitors who wanted to compromise him. But Roslyn managed even that. She claimed the father was her late husband, Samuel Goldman, and she'd hidden the pregnancy for personal reasons. Absurd? Yes, but technically unassailable. They released her a month after delivery. The Russian met her with flowers. For the first time in his life, a made man met a woman with flowers in front of the entire crew. He's lost his mind, some said. She's bewitched him, said others. But the truth was simpler and more complex. They truly loved each other, but their love wasn't built on romance. It was built on mutual respect for each other's strength and intelligence. Together, they created a scheme that brought in millions. Roslyn, through her casinos, found wealthy clients who lost everything. Then the Russian would approach them with an offer to help, lend them money at interest, or solve their problem for a favor. One such case entered New York criminal history. A department store director lost $200,000, money meant for inventory purchases from Europe. The Russian offered a solution. The director processes fake purchases, money goes to shell company accounts, from there to Roslyn and the Russian. The director gets a percentage and an alibi. The scheme worked. Moreover, it was repeated dozens of times with different people and different amounts. By 1974, Roslyn and the Russians' empire controlled a shadow turnover of several $1 million a month. But in April 1974, everything collapsed. April 1974, Metropolitan Correctional Center, Manhattan. In a cell for especially dangerous criminals sits the Russian. Charges: racketeering, extortion, organized crime. He's facing a serious sentence, up to 15 years. Meanwhile, Roslyn sits in her apartment on the Upper East Side and methodically burns documents in the bathtub. Notebooks with notes, photographs, IOUs. The smoke is so thick that neighbors call the fire department. When they arrive, Roslyn opens the door with a smile. Sorry, I burned dinner. I'm such a klutz. But she didn't manage to burn everything. 2 days later, FBI agents burst into the apartment. Search. And then something strange happens. They find nothing. Nothing at all. As if someone warned Roslyn not just about the Russians' arrest, but about the upcoming search. That someone? FBI Special Agent Alexander Sterling, Roslyn's handler, a man playing his own game where Roslyn was simultaneously a pawn, and a partner. Here's what's important to understand. By 1974, Roslyn had created not just a network of casinos, but a system of total control over New York's elite. Her files contained dossiers on hundreds of people, from store managers to assistant cabinet secretaries. Who was cheating with whom? Who stole how much? Who had what weaknesses? A contemporary of those events, a former federal prosecutor, recalled, "We called it the spider system. Roslyn at the center. From her, threads to the casinos. From the casinos to clients. From clients to their connections." And she held all these threads in her head. She had phenomenal memory. She remembered that General Peterson's wife lost $15,000 on March 3, 1973, and paid with a diamond necklace the general gave her for their anniversary. She remembered that the toy store manager, Sidorov, borrowed $30,000 at 50% annual interest and still owed $70,000. She remembered everything. But memory is one thing. Knowing how to use information is entirely different. A story that shows how Roslyn operated. Summer 1973. An FBI agent's wife comes to her crying. Her husband is leaving her for a young mistress, a secretary from a neighboring department. The wife begs for help. Roslyn didn't act directly. She found out the mistress had a brother who worked as an engineer at a defense contractor and was stealing components to sell to black market dealers. Roslyn arranged for information about the theft to reach the company's management. The brother was fired with a dishonorable discharge. The mistress rushed to save her brother, begged the FBI agent for help. He tried to help, but it came out. Scandal. FBI agent covering for defense contractor thieves. Result? The agent was demoted and transferred to another state. The mistress was left with nothing. The wife got her husband back, albeit with a tarnished reputation. And Roslyn got 3 eternal debtors. The grateful wife, the agent who knew who orchestrated his downfall, and the mistress who learned her lesson. She never destroyed people completely, recalled one of her associates. She broke them just enough to make them manageable, but keep them useful. That's art. By 1975, after the Russian was convicted, got only 3 years thanks to disappearing key witnesses and documents, Roslyn was alone at the head of her empire. And that's when many decided she was easy prey, a woman without male protection in the criminal world. The first to try was Big Tony the Mongol, a mob captain from the Lucchese family in Queens. He came with his crew to the Chelsea casino, sat at a table, didn't play, just said, "This is ours now. You can stay on as manager for 20%. Roslyn looked at him calmly, poured tea. "Sugar?" she asked. "Are you deaf?" "No, just polite, unlike some people. You know what I learned yesterday? You have an apartment in Forest Hills, registered in your mother-in-law's name. Inside, you're storing $500,000 in merchandise, stolen artwork, gold, foreign currency. The address is 71st Avenue, apartment 15. Would be a shame if the FBI found out about it." The Mongol went pale. How did she know? Who ratted? "We can make a deal," Roslyn continued. "You leave and forget the way here. Or tomorrow morning, your mother-in-law gets raided. Your choice." The Mongol left. No one tried to take over Roslyn's casinos again. Too expensive. Fall 1975, La Côte Basque Restaurant, Midtown. At a corner table sit 2 people, Roslyn and a gray-haired man with a professorial beard. This is Vincent the Professor Corelli. Yes, the one mentioned earlier. 48, old-school mob boss. One of those who remembered the old days. "Girl," he says, stirring sugar in his espresso. "The Russians inside. The Mongols sharpening his teeth. The feds are sniffing around. You need better protection than dead Spike and half-dead Benedetti." "What are you proposing?" Roslyn asks. "Marriage. Fake, of course. You become a mob wife, get immunity. I get 30% of your business. Everyone's happy." Roslyn thinks for exactly 1 minute, then says, 20%. And you help me open a factory. What factory? The professor is surprised. Shoes, with an underground operation. We'll make supposedly Italian shoes and sell them for 10 times the price. The professor laughs. The Russian was right. You're too smart to live long. Or smart enough to outlive everyone, Roslyn replies. The wedding was a week later. Quiet, no guests. They signed papers and went their separate ways. The professor to his mistress, a young woman from Naples. Roslyn home to 18-month-old Victor. But this fake marriage gave Roslyn what she needed. Status. She was no longer just that woman who runs casinos. She was a mob wife. People addressed her respectfully, took her seriously. They opened the factory in Newark in January 1976. Officially, an experimental division of an existing shoe factory. Unofficially, a production line for counterfeit goods from stolen leather with fake Italian labels. The scheme was brilliantly simple. The professor, through his people, organized thefts of leather from legitimate factories, small amounts from each so they wouldn't be noticed. The leather was brought to Newark, where it was made into shoes using Italian patterns that Roslyn obtained through diplomatic connections. Finished shoes got labels from famous brands and were sold through a network of fences across the country. Profit? $5 million a year. Clean. But Roslyn didn't stop there. Simultaneously, she launched another scheme with immigrants. By the mid-70s, there was a mass exodus of Soviet Jews to America. People sold apartments, belongings, jewelry, but couldn't take the money out, only $90 per person. That's where Roslyn appeared. Leave your valuables with me, she'd say. I'll transfer the money to your Swiss bank account, minus 30% for services. Many agreed. Better to lose 30% than 100%. Only thing is, Roslyn didn't always transfer the money to Swiss accounts. Some immigrants arriving in America discovered the accounts were empty. Who would they complain to? In fairness, Roslyn transferred money for most people. She was smart and understood. Reputation is more valuable than quick profit. She only cheated those she knew for certain wouldn't come back or retaliate. By 1978, Roslyn's fortune was estimated at $10 million, a fantastic sum, enough to buy 100 apartments in Manhattan or 1,000 Cadillacs. But Roslyn couldn't spend it. That was the paradox of her life. She was one of the wealthiest women in America and simultaneously had to live like an ordinary citizen. Official salary, $120 a week. Position, senior buyer for a wholesale import company. It was like living in a golden cage, recalled a friend from those years. She had millions, but she couldn't even buy a mink coat without raising questions about where the money came from. She drove an old Chevy, though she could afford 10 Lincolns. She lived in an ordinary 3-bedroom apartment, though she owned a mansion in the Hamptons registered under a shell company. And then the first symptoms of illness appeared in her life. Headaches, nausea, weakness. Doctors found nothing. Exhaustion, they said. Nervous breakdown. Roslyn knew it wasn't exhaustion. It was payment for a double life, for constant tension, for the fear that one morning someone would knock on the door and it would all end. And she began preparing her escape. Spring 1978, private clinic on Long Island. Roslyn lies under an IV drip. The diagnosis given by the best doctors sounds vague. Autonomic dysfunction due to chronic stress. But she knows the truth. Her body can't take it anymore. 10 years of double life. 10 years of waking every morning thinking, what if today's the day? Her son enters the room. Victor is 5, a beautiful boy with his father's eyes and his mother's smile. In his hands, a drawing, a house, a son, and 3 figures, Mom, Dad, and him. Mom, when's Dad coming home? Victor asks. Roslyn strokes his head. What should she tell the child? That his father, mob enforcer the Russian, is in federal prison? That he can't acknowledge his son because by mob rules it means death? That they'll never be a normal family? Soon, she says. Dad will come home soon. After her son leaves, Roslyn takes out a notebook from the nightstand. In small handwriting, she writes numbers. $10 million, her fortune. But where? $2 million in gold and diamonds, hidden in 5 locations around New York. $3 million cash in dollars, buried in the walls of a beach house in the Hamptons. $1.5 million in debts owed by various people. $3.5 million in Swiss Bank Corporation accounts. But to access them, she needs to personally go to Zurich, and she can't even leave the state. She's on federal watch, like everyone with access to foreign currency and foreigners. That evening, she receives an unexpected visitor, Alexander Sterling, her FBI handler. No longer a special agent, but now a supervisory agent. You don't look good, Ms. Ashford, he says, sitting in the chair by her bed. I'm tired, she replies. Tired from what? From robbing American citizens or from helping criminals launder money? Roslyn looks him in the eye. Agent Sterling, we're both adults. You know perfectly well what I do, and you know perfectly well that without my information you wouldn't have solved half your cases. So let's skip the moral posturing. Sterling smirks. You're a smart woman, Ms. Ashford. Too smart, too wealthy. You know what they're saying upstairs? That it's time to shut you down. You've served your purpose. Roslyn's heart skips a beat, but her face remains calm. And what are you proposing? She asks. I'm not proposing anything. I'm just warning you, for old time's sake. You have, let's say, 6 months, maybe a year. After that, it'll be too late. After Sterling leaves, Roslyn doesn't sleep all night. By morning, the decision is made. She needs to run. But how? The next months, she prepares her escape with maniacal thoroughness. Through a diplomatic contact, she obtains a blank West German passport. Through another, an invitation for treatment at a private clinic in Switzerland. Through a third, a spot on a cargo ship going from New York to Istanbul. But all these plans collapse, one after another. The diplomat is recalled. The invitation doesn't pass verification. The ship captain backs out at the last moment. And then comes a meeting that changes everything. October 1979. The Little Italy casino is closed, renovations after a fire. Roslyn sits alone in the half-dark hall. A man enters, tall, thin, with an intellectual's face. This is Mark Rubenstein, officially a translator at a trade office, unofficially a Mossad operative in New York. I hear you help our people transfer money abroad, he says. Who told you that? Those who've already left and are satisfied with your services. They talk for 2 hours, carefully, with hints, half-words. At the end, Rubenstein makes an offer. What if I told you I can get out not just money, but you too? That's impossible. I'm under surveillance. They watch me 24/7. Everything's possible. Question of price. What price? Information. We need information about certain people from your client base. Roslyn thinks, on one hand, betrayal. On the other, freedom for her and her son. I need time to think, she says. Time is short, Rubenstein replies. Soon it'll be the Olympics. After that, they'll tighten security even more. Decide quickly. December 1979. Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Rumors spread through New York about impending war, mobilization. Roslyn understands that if a major war starts, borders will close tight forever. She meets Rubenstein again and agrees. 1980. New York prepares for the Olympics. Undesirables are being cleared from the city. Building facades are painted. Street signs appear in multiple languages. And at an elite private school, 7-year-old Victor Ashford sits at a desk. The teacher calls him to the board. "Victor, recite the poem." The boy stands, but instead of Robert Frost, begins reciting mob poetry he learned from Uncle Kostya, Konstantin Voronov, a.k.a. Crutch, a mob captain and friend of the Russian. The class freezes. The teacher goes pale. Where did a 7-year-old learn criminal folklore? That evening, parent-teacher conference. Roslyn sits in the principal's office. Across from her, principal, vice principal, teacher, school psychologist. "Ms. Ashford," the principal begins, "your son is special. Too special. He knows things a child from a good family shouldn't know." "Such as?" Roslyn asks calmly. "He teaches other children how to play cards properly. He explains what a crew is and why it's needed. When asked what his father does, he says, 'He's inside.'" Roslyn stands. "My late husband died when Victor was an infant. If the child has an imagination, that's your psychologist's problem. If you can't handle it, I'll withdraw him." But at home, she grabs her son by the shoulders. "Who taught you this?" "Uncle Kostya," Victor answers. Uncle Kostya. Konstantin Voronov, Crutch, mob captain, the Russian's friend. Comes by sometimes, brings gifts. Roslyn can't forbid it. He's the Russian's eyes and ears on the outside. "Victor," she tells her son, "you need to understand. There are two worlds. One where we officially live. There, you're the son of a widow, a straight-A student, a future engineer. The other is real. There, your father is a mob enforcer, and it doesn't matter who I am. What matters is you must know how to live in both worlds and never confuse which one you're in." "Like you, Mom?" the boy asks. "Like me," Roslyn nods. From that day, she begins preparing her son for his fate. Boxing lessons with a former Golden Gloves champion. Law lessons. She herself explains the criminal code. Psychology lessons, teaching him to read people, see their weaknesses. "Remember," she says, "in our world there are no friends, only temporary allies. No love, only mutual benefit. No justice, only power." "And Dad?" Victor asks. "Does Dad love you?" Roslyn is silent for a long time, then answers, "Dad is the exception to every rule." Summer 1981. The Russian is released. Meeting at Penn Station. Roslyn brought Victor. The 8-year-old boy looks at the father he's only seen in photographs. "Hello, son," the Russian says. "Hello, Uncle Slava," Victor replies. They'd agreed. In public, he's not the father, but at home, behind closed doors, the Russian hugs his son and cries. A made man cries. "I'll make you a king," he tells Victor. "You'll have everything I couldn't have." Roslyn watches them and understands. This is the end. If Victor follows in his father's footsteps, he'll die. The mob world is changing. Old rules don't work. The new ones are brutal, without honor or principles. She makes a decision. Victor must leave, study abroad, become a normal person. But for that, she needs to leave first. Fall 1982. Victor comes home with a bloody face. Got in a fight with older kids who called his mother a mob whore. "You should have walked away," Roslyn says, treating his wounds. "The mob doesn't run," answers the 9-year-old boy. "The mob doesn't live long," his mother counters, "but they live well." Roslyn understands. There's no time left. Her son is already poisoned by this world. Another year or two, and it'll be too late. In December 1982, she does what she hadn't dared before. She goes to a meeting with Rubenstein and says, "I'm ready. Whatever it takes, but Get me and my son out immediately. There's a plan, but it's risky. Through a tourist group to Hungary, from there to Austria, from Austria, wherever you want. When? Spring. After Brezhnev's death, everything's in chaos. Perfect timing. But they don't know that Roslyn is already under total surveillance. Every move is tracked. Every call is monitored. The FBI is preparing a major operation to dismantle her entire network, and she has much less time than she thinks. November 10th, 1982. Brezhnev died. The country plunges into mourning, and at the FBI, nervous activity. Old agreements lose force. New ones aren't yet established. In this power vacuum, Roslyn sees a window of opportunity, but she doesn't know the main thing. 3 days before the General Secretary's death, on November 7th, the FBI approved Operation Spider, cleaning up New York's underground gambling operation. First name on the list? Roslyn Ashford. November 15th, Office of the NYPD Organized Crime Chief, Captain Thomas Gromov. On his desk, 3 thick volumes of the Ashford case file, 7 years of surveillance, wiretap transcripts, financial chains, testimony from 24 witnesses. Captain, we have everything. We can move, reports Lieutenant Sinitsyn. We wait, Gromov interrupts. Orders from above. Let the new administration decide. Meanwhile, Roslyn meets Diane Marino at Bloomingdale's. Yes, the same one who betrayed her in 1966. Diane has aged, looks scared. They're going to arrest you within the week, she whispers. My father was at a meeting. Why are you telling me this? My daughter has leukemia. She needs surgery in Israel. $300,000. Roslyn stares at the woman who ruined her life and sees not an enemy, but a mother. You'll get the money. But first, documents. Everything they have on me. Copies. November 18th. Diane brings a folder. Roslyn reads and goes cold. They know everything. Accounts, schemes, people, and most dangerous, the Swiss connection. Account number 447-8219, Swiss Bank Corporation. That evening, emergency meeting of her inner circle. The professor, 2 casino managers, the accountant, and the lawyer. They're taking us down, Roslyn says. We have 3 days max. We shut down. Where do we go? The professor asks. You go wherever you want. I'm going abroad. You're on the watch list, the lawyer shakes his head. Your photos at every checkpoint. Then I'll get off the list. November 20th. Reception room of the FBI Deputy Director. An hour of waiting, then the door opens. Ms. Ashford, what brings you here? A proposal. You're preparing my arrest. That's a mistake. I'm more useful free. I have files on half of New York's elite. I'll hand over everything in exchange for free passage out, me and my son. Pause. Even if I wanted to, Director Webster would never allow it. He's all about cleaning house. Director Webster is seriously ill, Roslyn says quietly. A year, at most. Then the rules will change. You can be the hero who cracked 100 cases or the one who let a valuable asset slip away. It's pure bluff, but the deputy director hesitates. Give me 3 days. November 22nd, phone call. Your offer is declined, a dry voice. Out of respect for past services, you have 24 hours. Then arrest. 24 hours to disappear from one of the most surveilled cities in the world. The final act is about to begin. November 23rd, 1983, early morning, New York City. Roslyn wakes 10-year-old Victor. Get up. We're going on vacation. What vacation? I have school. Forget school. Pack only essentials. 1 bag. They leave the apartment. Surveillance follows. Roslyn leads the watchers on a false trail, buys train tickets to Boston, makes it look like she's traveling under watch. But in Boston, they don't get off. The train continues to Buffalo. On the platform, Mark Rubenstein meets them. He has 2 Canadian passports. You're now Anna and Peter Kowalski, mother and son, returning home to Toronto. The rest is my problem. Border crossing, Buffalo, Fort Erie. Line of several hundred people. Roslyn listens carefully to real Canadians ahead, copies their intonations. Their turn. A young Border Patrol agent flips through the passport too long, looks into her eyes. Panic. Mrs. Kowalski, purpose of your visit to the U.S.?
Visiting relatives in Buffalo. My late husband's sister lives there. He died 2 years ago in a car accident.
The agent turns to the boy. What's your name?
Peter?
Victor answers in careful English.
What's yours, officer?
The officer smiles, stamps the passport. Go ahead. They take a few steps toward freedom, and suddenly a voice from behind. Stop! A man in a suit runs toward them. Roslyn recognizes him instantly. Lieutenant Sinitsyn from NYPD Organized Crime. Ms. Ashford, game over. But Canadian border guards step between them. Officer, do you have an official extradition request? No, but then please leave Canadian territory. Sinitsyn looks at Roslyn. She returns the gaze without triumph. In her eyes, exhaustion. Tell them documents are in the safe at the Chelsea location. My last gift. Within 24 hours, Roslyn and her son are in Toronto, hotel room. She feels it for the first time. They're free. But instead of relief comes emptiness. A few days later, flights to Vienna, then Zurich. On the morning of December 15, 1983, she enters a Swiss Bank Corporation branch and gives her account number. The manager looks up. Madame, the account was closed. 3 days ago, the funds were transferred elsewhere. Her entire fortune, gone. Millions, vanished. Betrayed by everyone. That same evening, Victor felt sick. High fever, weakness, blood in his tests. The diagnosis sounded like a death sentence. Acute leukemia. Roslyn and her son's story entered its final countdown. The final months. Zurich University Hospital. 10-year-old Victor undergoes brutal treatment. Diagnosis, acute leukemia. Roslyn barely leaves his bedside. The doctors are frank. Chances are slim. We're talking months. But Roslyn decides to fight. No money. Swiss accounts emptied. Jewelry barely covers small expenses. She calls old connections. No one answers. Even the professor tells her to her face, "You're a ghost. Ghosts don't have money." Only one person doesn't turn away. The Russian. 3 days later, a suitcase with $200,000 arrives at the hospital. Experimental therapy begins. Chemotherapy, radiation. Victor suffers, but holds on. The mob doesn't cry, he whispers to his mother. Roslyn feels her son's illness draining her own strength. Doctors detect severe anemia. She increasingly remembers that strange tea offered to her in an FBI office. Then it seemed like a gesture of respect. Now it's clear. It was a poisoned chalice. February 1988. Roslyn died of heart failure. Official version, illness. But many who knew her understood this could have been a long, carefully planned strike. Her life was constantly in the crosshairs of enemies, allies, and the Bureau. The funeral in Queens became an event. Dozens of mob figures attended, including Vincent, the Professor, Corelli, Victor, Vic the Ice, Severino, Big Tony, the Mongol. People stood shoulder to shoulder who would never meet in ordinary life. Enemies, rivals, partners. This wasn't about friendship or love for Roslyn. It was a statement. Her path was complete. Period. After her death, her empire collapsed quickly. Underground casinos were shut down. Associates were arrested or disappeared. The money vanished. No one ever figured out where. Everything Roslyn built over 20 years proved fragile and short-lived. Her son, Victor, nicknamed Little V, continued her work. With the Russian support, he quickly became a notable figure, but his life was equally short. In 1992, he was killed at age 28. Versions varied: revenge, internal cleanup, or simply eliminating an inconvenient player. But the result was the same. He repeated his mother's fate. Thus ended the Ashford dynasty story. Millions, connections, influence, all vanished. Only rumors remained, newspaper articles and classified archives. And here's the important thing. Roslyn's entire path, however brilliant it seemed, wasn't a victory. It was constant running, fear, betrayal, illness, and death. She tried to beat the system and won for a while, but the outcome is always the same. The system grinds everyone down. That's why romanticizing this story is dangerous. Roslyn Ashford wasn't a hero, a godmother, or a symbol of freedom. She was a woman who made her choice and paid for it with her life and her son's fate. This story isn't an example to follow, but a warning. Don't enter the world of shadow money and crime. There's no happiness there, no long life, no future. There's only one ending: prison, betrayal, or death. That's why, decades later, her name still resonates, not as a legend, but as a reminder. There are roads from which there's no return.